Right, welcome to this episode of the State of Mirrorless. Today it is my pleasure to introduce to you my friend Jan Kabili, who is a great photographer and educator who has been working for many years for lynda.com, and now she has her own show on the TWIP network, which is called The Fix. So welcome, Jan. How are you?
Hi, Ugo. Thanks so much for having me.
You've been also recently been traveling. I've been following a bit your posts on social media about your travels. You've been to France and then Mexico. Is that right?
It's true. I love to travel, mostly because when I'm traveling, nobody can get me and I have time to take photographs. So yes, we just came back from a couple of weeks in France, and we were also in Amsterdam. And then, like true hedonists, we went down to Mexico to a little beach community that's way off the beaten track and just lay on the sand and enjoyed.
Oh, wow. Wow, that might have been, should have been wonderful.
It was wonderful. Yeah. But now back to work.
So, tell us a bit about your life as a photographer, as an educator, your career. What do you do in practice?
Well, you may not know this, Ugo, but I wasn't always a photographer. I used to be a lawyer. Oh. I was, yeah. And I did that for 15 years. And I was I went to Stanford Law School. I did everything you were supposed to do. And just by this odd combination of circumstances that I did not go out to look for, I ended up going to graduate school in photography. And that led me down a whole nother path. And I was already an adult by then. So it's a good kind of example for other people that you can pick up a photography career later in life, as I did. And so I did that. And along the way in graduate school, I ran into Linda Weinman, and I was her assistant in a workshop. And she was just starting a school in Ojai, California, the Ojai Digital Arts Center, she called it at that time, but it really was the beginning of lynda.com. And so that was the beginning of my career as not only a photographer, but also a photo educator.
And you're an expert in all things Photoshop, editing, processing photos, and so on. Is that your main focus of your education activity, I think? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Right away, I started getting involved in the computer when it was first available as a photo editing tool. My education was in the darkroom with film. But my last year in grad school, they brought in computers and they started to try to teach, I don't know what they called it, computer art or something. And it was really funny because some of the students got to be better than the teachers right away. So I just loved it right away. I saw so many possibilities in Photoshop, which was really all that was available at that time, for taking a photograph and making it into something else. And that was always what I wanted to do, to start with the photograph and then to let I don't know what to call it, my creative side, my art side, take it somewhere else. And then when I became a teacher on my own, of course, I focused on that, on Photoshop at first. And then when Lightroom was introduced, I loved it right away. And I got all involved in Lightroom. And I think now I'm more of an expert in Lightroom than even in Photoshop.
All right. So how many tutorials, how many courses have you published on Lynda? I think a lot.
A lot. 40. 40 courses, yeah. And each course is like writing a book in terms of the effort that goes into it, planning it, making it in an order that people can use to really start from the beginning and work all the way through, or just be able to jump in and take little pieces that they need. And then, of course, there's recording process, which takes a week or two, depending on the length of the course, and then many weeks of editing by the production staff at lynda.com. So each course is a whole to-do. It's not like just sitting down and doing a tutorial like those that I sometimes do on my podcast or on YouTube.
Do you employ the same level of thoughtfulness and effort in processing your own photos? Is that something that you do on generally for many photos you do a lot of processing, or it's something that you do on occasion on photos that you think really deserve the best treatment?
Well, what I try to do is work with my photos right after a shoot, whether that shoot means walking around the neighborhood or being in Venice or whatever it is. So every time at the end of a day where I've shot photos, I try to make myself import them off of the camera's memory card and onto a drive where I keep my photos. I would also make a backup right at that time of the originals, and then I import them into Lightroom. And I try to do at least the basic photo managing on that day. In other words, going through each photo and adding a pick flag to those I like the best, rejecting those I hate, and leaving all the others kind of without any marking. I just use a simple system like that. And then I'll take those to which I've added the pick flag, and I'll add keywords to them in Lightroom. So I do all of that right away. And then in terms of editing photos, I'll go into the keyword for the picks. I'll make a collection of those, and then I'll start to edit those I think I'm going to use right away. For example, if I want to post some to Facebook right away, or to Google Plus, or to Instagram, I'll edit those right away. But then some in the pick flag collection, I won't edit right away, but I at least have them segregated to go back to, so that when I need a photo for a particular purpose, whether that's to post or to print or to often to use in my lynda.com courses, I have the best ones to go to, and I don't have to go fishing through everything, because I have probably 200,000 photos in my main Lightroom catalog.
That is very similar to what I do myself, in that with Lightroom, I mostly use Lightroom. I've tried using the stars, I've tried using colors and all kind of things. And in the end, I almost always resort to only using the pick flag. And okay, these are the ones that I want to keep. These are the keepers. These are the ones that I want to maybe use later, as you say. And the ones and I reject the ones that are blurry or badly exposed or not interesting. And then there are those that are okay. They're not flagged. I might go back to them later, but most of the times I just don't.
That's true. But one thing I do differently than you may do is I keep a lot of my bad photos on purpose. After I mark them as not so good, I still keep them. I don't delete them, because I'm teaching. And so I need examples of things that need fixes, or things, examples of what not to do sometimes. So I hold on to all the bad stuff too.
Yeah, I only really reject the really, really bad stuff, like when the shutter goes off by mistake, like when I'm walking, or the shutter goes off when the camera is in the bag. So
I know, I have a lot of those.
Black, or completely, there's nothing in the picture. Okay, those are the rejects. Those that there is something visible in them, even if they're not good, they stay with no flags.
Well, you know who I learned this from? Do you know who Jerry Olsman is?
Yes.
So he was a photographer and professor of photography long before digital, and he makes these wonderful composites in the darkroom, or he used to. And he told me, I had a workshop in the same place he did, and he told me that he just keeps all these photos, and he shoots kind of the most mundane things sometimes, just to have a library of images to choose from when he's creating composites. So I thought that was a really good idea, and I try to shoot kind of some boring things sometimes and keep everything, as long as I got it organized and can get my hands on it when I need it.
Yep. I'm pretty much on the same plane. Let's talk a little bit more about this process of workflow, about this workflow. Now with that, we have Lightroom CC or Lightroom 6 that has new features. Do you find yourself using Lightroom more, and maybe doing more and more in Lightroom what you used to do in Photoshop?
Yes, to some extent. First of all, I want to say something about Lightroom and Photoshop. I think there's so much misunderstanding about when to use Lightroom and when to use Photoshop and how they work together. So I actually did a whole course on lynda.com, and I'll probably be updating that course soon, about using Lightroom and Photoshop together. When and why you need both. And you really do still need both. Lightroom does a lot, but it doesn't do everything. You need Photoshop for some things, I call them pixel-based editing things. A great example would be if you need to make a really precise selection of an area to work on, then you're going to need Photoshop. Or if you wanted to add text or vector graphics or something to a photo, then you would need Photoshop. Or if you want to make a composite, putting photos together, you would need Photoshop. Now, with Lightroom 6 and Lightroom CC that came out together about a month ago, you need Photoshop a little bit less. In particular, you need Photoshop less when you're making combining photos into a high dynamic range image, and when you're combining photos into a panorama, because now in the latest versions of Lightroom, you can do that all in Lightroom. In the past, up until the current versions of Lightroom, you had to take multiple photos from Lightroom over to Photoshop, do your combining to HDR, your combining to panorama there, and then save the resulting image back to Lightroom. So now I can do all that right in Lightroom. And I make lots of HDR images, not because I'm trying to make those sort of surreal things that have become so popular, but because I'm trying to extend the dynamic range, to be able to shoot in a contrasty situation and still get detail in highlights and shadows and midtones, something that the camera usually can't do with just one shot, but that I can force together by shooting at least 2 or 3 images of the same scene and then combining, which I can now do in Lightroom using the Merge to HDR feature.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that feature, and I was using that in Photoshop, the Merge to HDR. Having it now in Lightroom, it makes my workflow much quicker. And I do the same as you with respect to HDR. I don't do those super surreal kind of HDR. I don't really like it, but I like to increase the dynamic range when in high contrast situations. And it's great to see that we are working very similarly. I mean,
yeah, you know what you're doing, Hugo. I've always said you'd be a great teacher, and you are a great teacher. You lead workshops, and you know what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. But there's one more thing I wanted to say about that. One thing I think people aren't exactly clear about the new HDR feature and the new panorama feature in Lightroom is that it is different from the way we used to do it in Photoshop, in that the resulting image format is different. When you do it now in Lightroom, you get a raw file, a DNG raw file that you can then treat like any raw file, where you have that huge range of editing latitude, where you can reduce noise in the shadows and get a pretty good result, better than you would get with the kind of file you used to get from Photoshop when you made an HDR or a panorama, which was not a raw file. If you went to Photoshop, you'd end up with either a TIFF or a PSD back in Lightroom. So that's a huge difference.
Yeah, and because of this, I've changed a bit my workflow. Before doing a panorama, especially before doing a panorama, I would do my initial global edits in Lightroom. So set the white balance, contrast, exposure, bit of sharpening, and so on. And then I would do a panorama and then apply the finishing touches in Lightroom maybe again. And now I don't do anything to the images before creating a panorama. I will just, select a bunch of images, try to see will it stitch? And if so, then go back, still staying in Lightroom. I still have a raw file, and I can apply all my global edits as if I had my original raw files. That's great. And I can always go back and do a different kind of processing, change the white balance completely to give a different mood to the photo without having to redo the process again.
That's right. And you're absolutely right that it doesn't make sense to do your edits to the component files or the individual bracketed files before making an HDR, because when you do join them together using Merge to HDR in Lightroom, it doesn't keep all of the adjustments that you've made. Some it keeps, some it doesn't, and I can't remember off the top of my head which it keeps and which it doesn't. The same is true when you're doing panoramas. So it's a way better idea to get them all merged together using the Lightroom feature, and then go ahead and make your changes as you would to any raw file to the resulting DNG.
Absolutely. Okay, so this show is about cameras, it's about gear, it's about mirrorless systems. So beside what happens after you've captured, I would like to talk with you about capturing images and choices of equipment that you do for capturing images. I know that you are now using mostly mirrorless systems. Can you tell a bit um, about your story, about your choices? What are you using now? What you were using before? What you find great about your new system, or maybe what you find not so great?
Well, sure. I was always a Nikon user. I used Nikon film cameras all the way back to the FE and the FM2 in my early explorations of photography. And then when digital came along, I stayed with Nikon just because I had all the lenses and stuff. And Nikon actually started, I think, a little before Canon did. So I was on the Nikon bandwagon. I think I used D90s. They were called, was it N90 or D90? D90, right?
D90. I had a D90 myself, so.
Sure, and those were great cameras. I mean, they weren't that expensive. Took all your old lenses, and that was a good start for digital. But honestly, I got sick of dragging the big camera and all the lenses around with me, particularly because I often shoot when I travel. And when I travel, what I do is I get up in the morning and I just start walking around wherever I am, Venice or Provence or Paris or wherever it is. I don't get any tourist attractions. I just walk around the city. I'm interested in the life of the city, kind of like a street shooter. And having that giant camera was a problem, the big DSLR, for two reasons. Number one, it's just a pain to carry, and when it's hot in the summer, there's just so much equipment. It's also, I think, kind of, and I don't mean to be political here, but it kind of brands you as not a local, right? A bit the ugly American, where you have this giant camera, here you come, and I don't like that. I want to kind of blend in. I think for me, I get better shots when I can blend in. So I was never able to solve that problem until the advent of mirrorless because of its small size. And of course, your viewers know that it is the lack of mirror that allows the manufacturers to make the cameras smaller and more discreet. I love that. I'm only 5 feet tall, and so that's another reason, that I don't need that big thing hanging off my shoulder. So I jumped on the bandwagon of mirrorless early. I researched it like crazy. I always do before I buy anything because, I don't have tons of extra money for a million cameras. And at that time, Olympus was making the OMD EM5, and that was the camera that everybody was saying was really great. So that's what I got, and I still have it today. I don't use it that much, but I kept it. Here it is, it's like a jewel, It's got these tiny little lenses that are so small. They fit in the pocket of my pants, and my pants aren't very big, right? So I could just have a couple lenses in my pockets and walk around with this beautiful little camera. It fits in my hand. It fits, like, for a small person, everything is right where you want it. You don't have this big, honker thing. And I don't even use a neck strap. I have the little Peak Design. What is this thing called? It's not the cuff. It's just the strap. Yeah, it's a wrist strap. And I just go like this, and I just walk around. And then I have the camera right there. And sometimes I'll shove the lenses in my pocket, really. So that is a beautiful thing about this camera. And, it served me well for a couple years. One thing I didn't like about this camera, the OMD EM5, is that too much of it was in the menus. And I learned photography back in the days where everything was right up here at the top in buttons and dials. So I'm looking for that. I don't want to have to go, wait a minute, and go here, look in the menu and look for something. By then, you've lost the decisive moment, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something I wasn't thrilled about, particularly. Now, there is a lot on the Olympus OMD that is in the buttons and dials. But one thing that isn't is the HDR capability. You actually have to go into two different menus to get that going. One to do the continuous shooting, I think it's called, and another to set up your bracketing options. Now, you can save all that to one of the custom buttons on the OMD EM5, but those buttons aren't labeled. And so I could never remember how I'd programmed the buttons. So I would have to always test it out. Kind of a hassle. So that I didn't like so much. But that was my first foray into mirrorless. Have you used that camera?
I didn't use the Olympus myself. I have some friends who have Olympus. I just briefly held it in my hand and just took a few shots and see how it feels. And I must say, I'm not well, the last one that I tested, well, just for a few minutes, was the small one. Is that the EM10?
Yes.
And for me, it's just too small. Unlike
Right.
you, I'm tall and I've got big hands. So the EM10 is really, really small for me. I've got the XC2, and this one is a bit small even. I've got the extra grip, which helps with my hands. So I'm
Yeah, I
more of a
understand. Yeah.
mid-range size guy.
Yeah, I can see for a guy this wouldn't work, but for me it works. And the other thing I love is the size of the lenses. I don't have my 17. I wish I had my 17 lens to show you. It really looks like something I'd wear around my neck almost. It's like a piece of jewelry. But here, for example, is the 60 millimeter macro lens for the OMD EM5, the Olympus lens. And it's a beautiful lens. I think it goes to, I don't know, it goes down to 1.8, I believe, or 2.8, maybe 2.8, and it's a real macro lens. So, and look how, I mean, it's just so light and so little. And then what else do I have? I have on here the 45 millimeter. And by the way, on the OMD EM5, you multiply by a factor of 2 to get to the traditional lens size. So this is like a 90 millimeter lens on here. And you know what? When I first started with this, I bought a kind of inexpensive lens that is so little, but this lens is amazing. This goes from 14 millimeters to 150. Multiply that by 2, that's a 28 to 300 millimeter lens in traditional lens size. And this was not an expensive lens. Now, it's not the greatest lens in the world, but for travel, perfect. It's the only lens you need. It's an old Olympus lens. So that's where I started with my mirrorless adventures. But I'm always trying to keep up with the latest and greatest. I'm a person who loves change, and I like to always see what else is new. And when I met Frederick Van Johnson, who is my mentor at the TWIP network of photography podcasts that I've joined, he kept talking about his Lumix GH4. So that was my next mirrorless camera. I took a look and I thought, you know what? He's right. This is a fantastic camera. Now, this camera is more substantial. It's bigger. And this would probably fit in your hand to go. Whereas it's a little heavier than the Olympus. It's got a bigger grip area over here. What I love about this camera, one of the many things, is that everything, here, let me see if I can show you just a minute. Here, everything I want is in the dials at the top. You set your mode here. You can set your, whether you're doing continuous or single image over here, or whether you're doing, you can change your ISO. It's hard to do this sideways. I'm so used to doing it regular. Let's see. Yeah, you can change your ISO by just clicking the button here. And then it also, on the back, has a really big, wait a minute, I gotta get this off. Here. It has a really big screen for if you like to shoot looking at the screen, or you can look through the viewfinder. And for me, that's crucial. I need a viewfinder because when I'm shooting outside in bright light, there's no way that screen is going to be able to let me see what I want to see. So I'm looking for a camera with manual light controls as well as viewfinder and a good LCD screen. And this one is fully articulating. You can pull it out, you can turn it, you can put it off, and I'll turn it around and just put it back here on the back so that it's showing everything I want. And I love that. It's just easy. It's clear. And of course, in addition, it has these huge capabilities for video, which I haven't explored very much yet, I must admit, but it's on the bucket list of what I'm going to be exploring.
And what is the lens that you have on that camera now?
Oh, this one, now this is my splurge. I love this lens. It's the 12 to 35 millimeter, I believe 1.8 Lumix lens. And it's fantastic. It's just right there. So that's like 24 to 70. So it's really great kind of mid-range lens with wide angle capabilities for if you want to shoot landscapes, but you can still zoom in quite a bit. You can do portraits, for example, with this. And then the cool part is that camera also takes all of my Olympus lenses And I've been building up my little collection of those. I've got a 17 millimeter, the 45 millimeter, the 60, and then my zoom lens. And I can use all those without having to get a step-up ring or whatever they call those things. They just go right on the camera because Olympus and Panasonic are using the same mount system. So it's great for that.
Do you have any options in case you wanted to go really wide? Because this is the lens that I'm using most on my Fuji is this, I don't know if you can see it, it's the 1024. And it's equivalent to 1536 millimeters. And
I don't have a
I really love going really wide when I'm shooting. I'm mostly shooting at the 10 millimeters end of it and going really wide and getting those shots where you have the perspective gets really enhanced, especially when you have some great foreground interest. It changes completely. It's completely unnatural in a way, but I like it.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. And that is definitely the one thing I'm lacking right now. I was thinking about buying a 12 millimeter, but even that is equivalent of a 24. So I'm kind of waiting to see, what comes out. Personally, what I found is I prefer to shoot detail over wide landscape. And so I never really felt hobbled by the fact that I didn't have a really, really wide lens. But I understand what you're saying, how neat to be able to get that foreground element with a wide background. That would be fun.
Do you shoot a lot of people when you travel?
Not so much people. You know why I don't do it? I would love to do it more. But I am shooting a lot for use in my own lynda.com courses. I find that when you shoot your own photos and you teach people with those, you are more genuine. You are more excited. You're actually, you're fixing your own photos rather than some stock photo or something that you had to beg or borrow from someone else. So I shoot almost all my own photos, or I use the ones with my partner who travels with me, who's more of a landscape photographer. And wait, what did you ask me? I've forgotten now.
No, I was asking if when you're traveling, you shoot a lot of people, locals, you do portraits.
Right. So because I don't want to have to take the time to go up to everybody that's in my photos and get photo releases. I tend to not show faces that much in my photos, although I would love to, but there is that limitation. And so for the most part, if people are in my photos, I'm using them more for scale at a distance. Now, when I'm shooting just for personal reasons, I do sometimes include people. I have some political issues about shooting strangers on the street. I'm not thrilled with the idea when I see people shooting, for example, homeless people, because they're such interesting faces, but yet not giving something back or interacting with. And the same goes when you're in a foreign country, just sort of going around and kind of, I don't know, it's almost like stealing people's faces to me. So I have that little bit hesitation from a personal standpoint as well of shooting people. How do you feel about it?
I don't feel much. I don't like to shoot homeless people and beggars in general. I think it's a bit of exploitative, if that is the right term. I do a bit of street photography where you shoot strangers even without them knowing that you are taking their photo, without necessarily asking for permission in general. And I'm okay with it. I mean, I mostly went over my initial fears and resistance to it. I also do a bit, I was doing it more, like last year I was doing this Stranger a Day project where every day I would go to somebody and ask for a portrait. And I still do that to an extent, not every day because it's just taking up too much time and effort, but I still do it. And I like to go up to people that I think are interesting, they have interesting faces, and just ask, can I take your portrait? And most of the time they would say yes. And then I would show them their portrait on the back of the camera, and sometimes give them my business card and tell, if you want a copy, just write me an email. I will send you a copy. And this is I like this because it creates a conversation. It, even if it's a very small thing, but you're giving something back. You're offering to give them their photo if they want it.
Oh, that's very nice. I like that. I like that. Well, you know, the other reason that I don't do it that much, it makes me a little nervous. And one thing I love about photography is that it is very relaxing for me. And I have a pretty high stress work life. You know, I'm constantly producing, writing books, doing courses. When I'm shooting, I love the fact that it gets me out of me. You know, I don't think. I'm just walking around in a different kind of a state. And I think a lot of landscape photographers may experience that same thing. So I think that's another reason that I stay away from strangers. I love taking photos of people I know, of course, but people I don't know, I don't do so much. But, you know, just here around in town when we go to the coffee shop and we sit with our friends, it's always fun to take their pictures. Or, you know, or my family. I love doing that. And I try to do it in an artistic way, not just doing snapshots.
Yeah, sure. Strangely, I find it more difficult to take photo of my friends or my family members than I do of strangers. I
That's
don't know why
interesting.
that is, but it's just the way it is.
It is funny, isn't it? Yeah.
So, what were we talking about? Yeah, so cameras and so you shoot Olympus. You used to shoot Olympus and now Panasonic,
Yes.
mostly. And you got a good set of lenses and the lightweight and everything. So you're pretty happy. You're not thinking of going back to a DSLR anytime soon. Or
No
did
way.
you keep your any of your old equipment? Because I know some people keep it they switch it to mirrorless, but maybe they want to use in the studio or something when they have a real job that requires a certain level of maybe quality, or they shoot sports or birds. So they say, there are no, for instance, good long lenses for the Fuji system. So if you want to shoot birds, you're a bit limited.
That's interesting. No, you know, I don't have my latest Nikon that I had, I gave to my son, who has a startup where he's manufacturing and selling 3D printers. And he needed to make some videos to put on the website. I'm like, here, you can have my Nikon camera to do that. And so he's got that. But you know what I do have are some fantastic film cameras. I have I'm sad to say they're kind of packed away in the basement, but I have a Mamiya RZ67. Do you know what that is? Do you remember those? Has a bellows, medium format camera with Polaroid backs, several different big solid lenses. I mean, that thing, I paid $3,000 for that 20, 30 years ago. And it's a fantastic camera, and I cannot bring myself to part with it because it's something that I think you're not going to be able to find in the future. So I do keep those cameras. I've got my really old Nikon film cameras just for nostalgia purposes and because they're probably not worth much on the market anymore. But no, I don't have a studio camera. I'm really not a studio shooter. Although I did some work in that in graduate school, it never really excited me as much as getting out and, and shooting outside, shooting in the world.
You know what? I started with film. I was just a snap shooter, vacation, holiday, family snap shooter. I started really getting seriously into photography with digital. And I don't think I will ever go back to my 35 millimeter film DSLR because nowadays, at least in my opinion, in that kind of format or segment, digital is so much better in many respects. But I always keep telling to myself that one day when I grow up, when maybe I don't have a day job anymore, I want to go into film seriously, but not with a 35 millimeter. I want to go large format. Because if you have to go back into film, you need to do it seriously. I don't want to go back into something that I can get the same results that I can get with digital. I want
That's a very good point.
Or I want to go like, I don't know, Ansel Adams with a view camera 8x10 with wet plates in the field.
that would be great. Yeah, it's so fun. You should totally do it. And I'm a member of a Facebook group, I don't even know what it's called, where people are constantly trying to sell those kinds of cameras at great prices, so you can probably get something that you can use for that.
Yep, that's my dream. One day I will, maybe.
Well, it's interesting. That is becoming quite avant-garde, to go back to film and do all kinds of film processing. And in fact, that was my first love, was doing not just straight film processing, but doing alternative processing. So I would make I would do enlarged negatives in the darkroom by printing onto film, and then take those large negatives and use non-darkroom processes to make prints. So for example, you would coat paper with cyanotype or gum bichromate or other kinds of chemicals, and then put these large negatives on top and either take them outside in the sun or put them into a big machine that was kind of like the sun and process them. So, and then I did that. I did pinhole cameras with film in the back, big medium format film just shoved in the back of a shoebox that I'd made, and made a pinhole camera out of that. So I was into all that stuff with film long ago, before there was digital, and it is so much fun. And my photo professor friends tell me that their students really want to do that it's coming back, that it's becoming, the new old or something, or the old new or something like that.
Yeah, I was just listening, what was that, a few days ago? The Digital Photo Experience podcast with Rick Salmon and Juan Pons?
Yes.
Yeah, they were interviewing somebody who was doing those kind of non-conventional alternative analog processes. I don't remember her name, but she was explaining a bit of what you were just saying. It's still very much in vogue in some circles, and it's got to be a lot of fun.
It is, and I really think that you learn from every different process that you try. I'm always looking for the new. So like lately, for example, I've gotten all involved with iPhoneography, where there are some really superb artists practicing in this field. It's not just a matter of using iPhone for snapshots. I love it. It's just amazing how much you have with all the different apps, the ways that you can experiment, and the kind of real art that you can make with that little, tiny, well, I've got the non-tiny one, but the little tiny camera, the iPhone. Yeah.
I cannot bring myself to use the iPhone. I was really try to use it. I don't know. It's not working for me.
Really?
So, yeah.
Oh, well, I really like it. Here you can see I have, I don't know if you can see that. Maybe not. I have tons of capture apps, but I think it's not coming across on my, it's not coming across, but I just want to experiment. So for example, last night I went to a talk by a photographer, Karen Devine, who is in the field of iconography and has published some books. And she was showing, it was kind of like slides, but it was digital slides of work she had done on a trip to India, where she had used an app, Hipstermatic, to shoot with, and then done a lot of the processing in Snapseed on the iPhone, and fantastic images, really beautiful, with some hint of reality, but also this kind of surreality that you just can't get with a traditional camera. So I love experimenting. I love that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a matter of quality, of image quality in general. Because when I take a photo with my iPhone, even though I've got the iPhone 6, which has an awesome camera and everything, I take a photo with it, even if the light is good. To me, it's always like, meh, I don't know. So what I do a lot, and I started using Instagram recently, I would take photos with my camera here, and it's great that those cameras now have Wi-Fi. So I would, when I'm traveling, I would just transfer the image to the phone, do a bit of processing with Snapseed or whatever, and then share it on Instagram directly. That's what I do, but almost never from the phone. I don't know. It's just.
Well, I do feel like I'm cheating, but sometimes it's all I have with me. And who was it that said the best camera is the camera you have with you?
Chase Jarvis.
That's right. Yeah. So I kind of believe that. And so now I'm doing, do you mind if I tell you about a course that I'm doing on lynda.com?
Yeah, I just wanted to One thing I was while you were talking, I was doing a bit of research. The photographer I was mentioning earlier that does all that alternative processing things is called Jill Enfield.
Oh, of course. Jill Enfield has been doing it for a long time at workshops, at Santa Fe photo workshops and Maine photo workshops and Anderson Ranch Art Center, where I teach in Colorado. And, she's a real well-known, respected artist who is doing this sort of, I don't know what to call it. Now it's, alternative processing, I guess, is where.
I think that's what she called it.
Yeah. Yeah, she's terrific.
Yeah. Anyway, what did you want to say?
Oh, so I was going to say, so I'd say my main thing that I do most of the time is I'm preparing or recording lynda.com courses. And until recently, they have been pretty much straight courses about how to process and manage your photos in Lightroom, in Adobe Camera Raw, in Photoshop, a little bit in Elements, a little bit Bridge, kind of all those applications. But recently, I got such a great opportunity to do a weekly series on lynda.com called Photo Tools Weekly. And basically, that is about any kind of processing, anything you might do to your photos after the shoot. And so that opens up the world to be able to show people some of my really most favorite apps on the iPhone, desktop apps, web apps on your computer, all the different ways that you can now work with your photos beyond just the straight photo. Although I do include quite a lot in that series on just straight photo editing and photo managing. But I also have that little window to bring in some of the methods that really excite me these days.
Great. Okay, before we end this really interesting conversation, and it would be a pity to have to end it, but before we finish, can you tell us a bit about The Fix?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yes, so The Fix is one of a group of podcasts on the TWIP network. You may have heard of TWIP, This Week in Photo, which started out as just a single podcast by Frederick Van Johnson, and over the years has just exploded so that Frederick started a network of podcasts. And I was so excited that he asked me to do a podcast on the TWIP network about Photoshop, Lightroom, post-processing in general, all the things you do to a photo after the shoot. So that podcast is called TWIP The Fix, and it is a weekly podcast. It's both audio and video. You can catch the audio on iTunes or in your favorite RSS reader if you're a non-iPhone person. You can also watch the video of the podcast at thisweekinphoto.com. And I'm really proud of it. Each week, I try to bring a different guest, as you do, Ugo. And I'm so lucky to have met so many different people over the years. I've been in this business of being a photographer and teaching photography since, 1990s. So I have this wide circle of friends and acquaintances. And I love bringing them in to talk with me, as you do, about what they're doing, about photo processes, about workflow, and then having each one of them show a tutorial, as they're so generous to do. And so that's what goes on each week. I try to keep it pretty short so that it's, a streamlined length so someone can watch or listen to it without devoting a whole afternoon or a whole evening. And that's what's happening. And so we've had wonderful guests, everyone from Rick Salmon to Peter Crow, just so many people that you've heard of and maybe some you haven't heard of, that I'm excited to bring to the listening audience and the watching audience.
I blame you and your friends at TWIP and Frederick and so on for increasing the number of unlistened to podcasts I have on my phone. You're doing too many. I've got a backlog. I also, because I mostly listen to podcasts when I'm driving, I just connect the phone to my car stereo system and I listen to podcasts, and I need to drive more.
I know, I don't drive anymore
with all of them.
I know. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I ride my bike or I walk, so I don't listen. But, this is not my first podcast. I jumped into podcasting right off the bat when it first started. Years ago, I had a show called photoshoponline.tv. And it was even before the Photoshop guys, the Scott Kelby show. And so I practiced then. And I will tell you that it's so much easier to do now. Now that we have Google Plus Hangouts, for example, and some other media as well, makes life a lot easier than having to do everything from scratch. So it's fun.
Yeah. So what's next? What has the future in store for you? Any planned travels or anything else that you might want to talk about?
Well, my next, so I try to do it all. I found that people learn in different ways. So I like to write, I like to do video, I like to do courses, I like to podcast, and I also like to teach live workshops when I have time. So the next things that are happening for me are more lynda.com courses coming up, more weekly episodes of Photo Tools Weekly on lynda.com. And then I also have a live workshop coming up in Colorado near Aspen at the Anderson Ranch Art Center, where I'm going to teach Lightroom for beginner and intermediate users. It's a real intense 5-day workshop, July, I think 20th or July 19th to 24th. And if you come up there, I promise you, when you leave, you will know Lightroom, you will have a workflow, we will work with your own photos, you will get it. Once and for all, you will get it. So even if you kind of use Lightroom, but you still have a lot of questions, I would love to spend time with you personally there. It's also a wonderful environment. It's beautiful. It's great to interact with other artists and other medium as you do there. So that's andersonranch.org is where you go to find out about that. And I'm going to be teaching on a cruise ship in Northern Europe. I think it's called the Baltic area, Scandinavia, and then over into Russia through Crystal Cruises in August. And I may be writing another Lightroom book. That's still a little bit secret.
So andersonranch.org is the website for that workshop, but in general, if people want to keep up with you and all of your activities, where they should go to?
That's right. And then I would hope that people would go to lynda.com/Jan Kabili. And there you will see all of the many courses available there for you. And each course has some free movies. So even if you're not a lynda.com member, if you go to lynda.com/Jan Kabili, you can peek in and see what's in each course and listen to the free movies that are in each course to get a taste.
And the fix would be at thisweekinphoto.com/the fix.
The fix, yes.
Okay, so it was great talking to you. Before we close, is there anything else that you would like our viewers to know?
I just wanted to say thank you to Ugo C. Did I say your name right?
Yeah, almost.
How do you tell me?
First name was right. Perfect. The last name is pronounced Che.
Che. I always wondered. So Ugo Che, I'll tell people that we met in the early days of Google Plus. Do you remember?
I remember. Yeah.
And it's really been a pleasure to see your photos over the years and to watch your podcast, which is terrific, and just to have made a new friend in a wonderful place. I'm coming to visit you someday.
Yeah, you should definitely. And maybe I will come to Colorado one day. I also got other friends that I've met on that's the great thing about Google Plus, that I've met people from all over the world and then met them in real life. And that's always the best part of social media and social networks. And Google Plus was just from the beginning an amazing community of photographers that created bonds that will last beyond the network, whatever happens to Google Plus.
I believe so too. I think so too. And so we'll always be friends. Let's shake on it.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks for being with us. And I hope our viewers will appreciate this interview.
I hope they do too. Bye. Thank you very much. And bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.